Let us bring in now and get some legal analysis. Jonathan Turley, law professor and Fox News contributor. Jonathan, we're reading. We now have multiple sources telling us that there are 10 indictments named here. Again, an educated guess. I think we know the names. Certainly at the top of the list would be President Donald J. Trump. This would now be his fourth indictment. One big difference that we would see in this case, probably versus the other three previous indictments, would be Georgia Sunshine Law's likelihood of this being on television is probably great. Will that be impactful to the American people more so than the other cases?
Well, it will be. The other big distinction is that the cases brought by Jack Smith are subject to presidential pardon, including the possibility of a self-pardon by Donald Trump if he's reelected. The New York and Georgia cases are not subject to federal pardon authority. The suggestion is that there are not just 10 indictments, but that it's based on RICO. And that's a favorite tool of this particular prosecutor. It requires a pattern to be shown, usually of fraud, that ties these people together. This is a lot of indictments, obviously. If you've got 10 defendants, that is also similar to a lot of criminal RICO statutes. But the danger here is that it can dilute the legitimacy of the case unless you can show strong linkages on a case of this kind. You don't want it to look like you're charging everyone and letting God sort them out. And so we have to see what evidence they actually turned up. One of the most concerning aspects about this particular investigation, and there's a number of them, is that it began after the disclosure of the call of Donald Trump to Georgia election officials. That call has been widely misrepresented, in my view. In the call, President Trump at the time said you only need to find around 11,000 votes. And that has been taken as an invitation for fraud. There is, of course, a more obvious explanation, and that is the Georgia officials were saying that further state recounts might not be necessary. And it would be natural for Trump to say, look, you only need to find 11,000 to turn the outcome of this election. So I don't need that many votes. Thus, a state recount is justified. Now, either of those interpretations can be believed by citizens, but you usually need something more clear to establish a criminal case. To me, the more innocent explanation is the more obvious one.
Yeah, let me ask you, first of all, can 10 indictments, could it be more than 10 people? In other words, could there be multiple people, or would that number 10 be the number of people?
Yeah, it's hard to say because in the vernacular that people use, it could be individual defendants. It does not appear to be a reference to the counts. There's been other leaks saying that we have dozens of counts here. We don't know much, quite frankly, about what's in this indictment against Donald Trump. If there is such an indictment, we expect there is. There have been suggestions that the call will be featured prominently. There's also been references to a controversy involving Coffee County. This was where the Trump team gained access to one of the voting machines. Now, you have to keep in mind that back then, and you and I were doing the coverage, the Trump team was trying to get access to these machines because they were alleging that the machines could be manipulated and that votes could be flipped. Apparently someone, and she now may be one of these defendants, gave them access to machines in Coffee County. That has been alleged to be a breach of security of that machine. It was after the election, but the machines were still being controlled, obviously, by the election officials. The problem with that is that the emails that we've read to the Trump team say that we got an invitation to see one of these machines and that there's been a voluntary access granted. She's going to need something more than that, right? She's going to need to show that there was a knowing criminal intent here, not just by some of these individuals in Georgia, but of Donald Trump himself.
Yeah, let me just remind people what has happened here. We now have what has been unfolding in the last 17 minutes is that the grand jury that worked late into the night tonight, up until the moment we're coming on the air, has come up with what we believe now reported widely 10 indictments signed by the judge, filed with the clerk. And what we're now discovering and finding out a little color behind the scenes here, the clerk was asked about any names or charges in the indictment because, you know, remember, it was signed by a judge and filed with the clerk, and the clerk just told reporters that we would hear what is in this what are in these indictments tonight. Worst case scenario, quote, 3 hours. A representative from Fulton County Superior Court Clerk's Office, representative from the Fulton County DA's office, and several representatives from the Fulton County Sheriff's Office have walked into the courtroom, 8D, and that's Judge Robert McBurney's courtroom. And so all of this is now unfolding behind the scenes, which basically means at any point we can be informed of what it is that the grand jury was actually working late into the night for. Let me go back to this issue of RICO and racketeering and conspiracy, which we have heard a lot about in the days and even weeks now leading up to what was fairly inevitable in Fulton County. Usually when you hear RICO, racketeering, you think about those were designed to go after specifically the mob. How do you come up with a RICO conspiracy charge, racketeering charge? How do you foresee the arguments going down in that way?
Well, it has been expanded for use beyond the mob. What you have to show is that a predicate offense, one of the offenses listed in the state statute, has occurred, and that there's a pattern of those crimes, 2 or 3 linked together, is enough to establish a RICO conspiracy. They're clearly looking into electoral fraud and possible forgery and other crimes that may be alleged as predicate offenses. The thing about RICO prosecutions is that they are a favorite of not just many prosecutors, but this particular prosecutor. Willis sort of cut her teeth on RICO cases. She brought a very famous case against a group of teachers. So this is sort of in her wheelhouse. The question, however, is still those interstitial links, those connections between these predicate offenses and these defendants. How strong are they? We haven't heard any direct linkages to criminal conduct by Donald Trump. We'll have to see what they have and whether she was able to, surmount to cross that Rubicon. But with 10 people, there's also added pressure on some defendants to flip. It's a very common RICO tactic among prosecutors to charge everyone and see if some of these low-hanging fruit defendants will decide that they're better off giving states evidence.
All right,
usually these RICO charges come with heavy penalties.
All right, Fox News contributor and, of course, law professor Jonathan Turley. He will be staying with us throughout the hour tonight. Thank you. We'll stand by. We'll be getting back to you. Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.